Women have always been a persecuted section of society, even since the earliest days of society. This is in large part to outdated beliefs, traditionalism, and a persistent following of patriarchal systems in human culture. Women have been shoehorned into certain professions, roles, situations which have been ascertained by others, usually other women and men, as appropriate for them with little if any reference to their personal preference. Even in modern times, we can still see the repercussions and long-standing consequences of such a discriminatory and partial line of thinking. Even now, women around the globe aren't allowed basic rights, nor dignity or basic respect that they have a right to. It's no wonder that their conditions were even more pathetic and miserable in the medieval ages. Women were not just ignored from public life. There were active attempts made to disrupt and ruin their lives by external parties who had their own interests in mind and didn't mind in any collateral damage caused by their actions. What kind of punishments must these women have received? How severe were they? What kinds of crime would have been committed to get such severe repercussions? Do any of them continue today? Well, you don't have to wonder, because we're going to take a look at some of the creepiest and harshest punishments meted out to women during the medieval ages, some which inevitably resulted in horrific and grotesque deaths. To understand why women were almost exclusively given such horrific punishments, we'll have to analyze the precarious position of women in the rigid social hierarchy of the Middle Ages. Women, even if they belonged to the higher classes, were always secondary citizens. They were considered to only have any worth when they were complemented to a man, and their individual rights were next to none existed. Women were upheld as icons of purity, beauty, and kindness, but none of these wonderful traits were exhibited in the general treatment meted out to women. In high society, women were little more than trophies, meant to be admired and signify the power and wealth of the man they'd marry. Women were synonymous with currency, as they were traded from family to family to merge and increase prestige, as the men in each family saw fit. The wishes or desires of the girls themselves were never taken into account, and this often resulted in unhappy marriages that were rife with extramarital affairs, only held together for the sake of showing face. Among common folk, women had more responsibility than their male counterparts, but were not given the resources nor respect deserving to them. They were often forced to give birth to an unsustainable number of children and provide for the family while simultaneously taking care of other duties as a housewife. In such a situation, working men were often so exhausted that they'd simply collapse and die. Those with drunkards for husbands also had to deal with constant domestic abuse, and in general the lives of these women were already a great deal miserable. Education is another significant factor in this era's attitude towards women. Education was not as widespread nor accessible as it is today, and as a result, much of what men considered to be true were based on hearsay and rumors that were fabricated out of foolishness or malice. Ignorant masses, when spurred to action, thoughtlessly lynched and tortured individuals without considering the possibility of innocence nor the logical fallacies in their methods. These factors and many more coupled together resulted in an environment that by its nature was hostile to women and valued their words lesser in comparison to their male counterparts. Some of the horrific punishments meted to these women are as follows. We present you 3 creepy things. Chances are, if you've read parts of the Old Testament from the Bible, you'll have noticed instances where men parade women with shaved heads naked through villages and towns as a form of public humiliation. This is a form of punishment usually meted out to women who were accused of having committed adultery or an extramarital affair. The purpose of such a punishment is to ostracize the woman and isolate her from society by exposing her privacy in such a violating manner that she's not able to normally interact with her peers again. The shaving of hair was done as a means to isolate them even more. Hair was seen as one of the trademarks of femininity, and the lack of it made the individual stand out all the more. Often the accused were branded with symbols to permanently declare them as unclean or as infidels. Such treatment was harsh and resulted in these individuals being excluded from any possible human companionship for the rest of their lives. While this was not that heavy a physical punishment, it took a heavy toll on the victim's mental state. They were excluded from gatherings, unable to live with other citizens, and had to live as outcasts. The men with whom they committed the affairs with were left scot-free and clear of any wrongdoing. The justification for this usually was that men were seduced by these women into doing these acts, and that they had no control over their actions. This provided an easy out for the men who absolved themselves of any sin, and by extension punishment. This was even reproduced in the last century by the German dictator Adolf Hitler, who punished Aryan women who met or even had contact with any undesirable individuals, according to Nazi propaganda, who were to be paraded on the streets with shaved heads, faces blackened, with soot and placards hanging from their necks saying, "I have sullied the honor of the nation." That was the first one. Terrible, isn't it? Now on to the next creepy story about flogging and whipping. But before we do that, please hit the like button and don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more interesting videos. Flogging or whipping is one of the harshest punishments devised by man. It's extremely painful, leaves permanent scars, and often results in death due to sheer damage it inflicts on a person's body. The number of lashes and the intensity were decided by the authorities, and by the end of the punishment, the individuals were often unrecognizable, and the whipped areas were often mutilated beyond any hope of repair or restoration. Women in particular were often given whippings as a means of punishment in response to the disobedience to male figures of authority, violating curfew and restrictions that were imposed on them, and for committing adultery. The point of such intense punishment is to leave such an indelible mark on an individual that it would stop them from ever even considering the action they did again. This often resulted in the merciless mutilation of multiple women for things that wouldn't even be considered crime today. Some ultra-conservative nations still use flogging to this day as a means of judicial punishment. In medieval times, women were expected to be good housewives who took care of home and hearth without disturbing the established social order in any manner. Any individuals who differed were shunned and isolated. Any woman who was perceived to be too different from the ideal of a woman of that time was declared a witch and would often be sentenced to burning at the stake. Witches were feared and were thought to only die from burning. The means to determine whether a woman was a witch were nonsensical and often non-existent. This is a classic example of the effects of lack of education and mob mentality. Many innocent, hapless women were tied to stakes and burnt alive, screaming till their last breath. Several individuals who minded their own business were not excluded from this madness. They too were burnt at the stake, accused of ruining crops, livestock, and spreading death and pestilence. Such deaths were agonizing and extremely painful, their only remains being a heap of ashes. Women were treated pathetically in medieval times. Their desires were not considered to be ones that deserved respect nor fruition. They were objectified, discriminated against, and were often little more than currency for the agenda of patriarchal power. Despite the ideals and values associated with them, women continue to be discriminated against. Our means of punishment have just entered a different medium. Witch hunts still continue. We burn reputations without a moment's hesitation, parading affairs that should have stayed behind closed doors for all to see, regardless of consequence. Is it the right of every woman and man to have their dignity intact? In reflecting on the harrowing punishments inflicted upon women during the medieval age, it becomes starkly apparent how deeply rooted misogyny and prejudice were in historical societies. The systemic degradation of women, both psychologically and physically, underscores the enduring struggle for gender equality. The injustices suffered by women during that time were emblematic of the larger societal problem. Women were marginalized, objectified, and silenced. Their lives were controlled by a patriarchal system that stripped them of agency and relegated them to a subordinate status. The punishments described, whether public humiliation, flogging, or burning at the stake, were grotesque results of the systemic misogyny that seeped into every aspect of medieval society. Today, while progress has been made in many parts of the world, echoes of the past still resonate in gender inequalities and discrimination. The Me Too movement, gender pay gaps, and ongoing battles for reproductive rights highlight the right for gender equality is far from over. It is crucial to acknowledge the historical context that perpetuated these injustices, learn from it, and continue the pursuit of a more equitable and just society. The tales of medieval punishment serve as a chilling reminder of the lengths to which society can go when fueled by ignorance, fear, and prejudice. As we confront the injustices of the past and present, it's imperative that we stand together to dismantle the systemic barriers that continue to oppress women, ensuring that every individual, regardless of gender, is afforded the dignity, respect, and equality they deserve. Only through education, empathy, and collective action can we hope to break free from the chains of the past and build a future where every person is treated with fairness, compassion, and understanding. What are your thoughts after watching this video? Please let us know in the comments and subscribe to the channel for more interesting videos.